All right. Good morning, Doug. We ended last Friday saying, hey, we could talk about this banking issue, but why don't we just save it? Nothing will happen between now and next week. And it turns out a lot happened between last Friday and, well, certainly today. So what's your take on this banking crisis we might be entering? Is it a crisis?
Yeah, it definitely is. And perhaps a quote from Lenin would be appropriate. He said, there are weeks when years happen and years when nothing happens. And this is one of those times. So, and it's just the start of the crisis, because don't forget that the hyper bull market in bonds only ended a year ago. Biggest bubble, one of the biggest bubbles in all of world history. It just ended. And then the bubble, super bubble, not a hyper bubble. I'm not sure what the distinction between those. I'm making my own.
It's big, really big.
Big, yeah. And stocks ended before that. So yeah, there's a lot of bubbles that are going to be bursting because, we just had an hour conversation with Jim Rogers, who's an old friend of mine. And as Jimmy pointed out, we've been friends for 50 years. And, he pointed out that the whole world is in a bubble, which is not news, but it's worthwhile re-emphasizing that and keeping it in the front of your mind. And the bubbles just started to deflate. Will the bubble deflate slowly, like a helium balloon at a kid's party, just kind of gradually goes down? Or will it pop? Depends on what the Fed's going to do. And while I'm on the subject, when you read the popular press, which I hate doing, but you have to do it if you're going to be in this business. So often now, there are Fed board members, not just of the New York Fed, but all over the other Fed banks, the little baby Fed banks, and they all have opinions, and they're all in the news. That never used to be the case. It used to be nobody knew or nobody really cared who any of the Fed members were, except for the chairman of the Fed. Some people would know that. But now they're becoming major characters, and it makes sense because the Fed actually controls the economy at this point. It's not taxes that runs the US government. It's Fed monetization of government debt that floats the government. So, okay, long answer to the question is, yeah, this is really serious. So if 2009 was bad and 2000 was bad, and they were, and both of them were kissed and made better by the government doing more of the same things that got us into trouble. This one is going to be really big.
Yeah.
And hate to make say things that sound so certain and so ex cathedra, because nobody knows what's going to happen. But that's my opinion. It's going to be a disaster. And it's just starting. Fortunately, none of my other commodity positions have worked out, but I have stops under my calls and puts. So, I lost what I stood to gain. Okay, tough luck. But I do have a position in the VIX where I was long since 1980, and I'm still long at 26. And I don't know how high it can go. But it can go to 30 or 35 or something like that. So you just got to get one thing right once in a while, and you'll be okay.
Well, and unless you're a Silicon Valley billionaire, you don't have to be right, apparently, because you just call daddy if something goes wrong and they show up and backstop all your bank accounts and everything else. So you don't have to be right all the time, I guess, in today's Fed ruled world.
That is a very good point, because, once again, people don't remember this ancient history, but when us baby boomers first started opening up bank accounts, which we could do as little kids with no identification whatsoever, you just say who you were and you open a bank account. Back in those days, the FDIC insured your deposit, had a sticker on the door, to $10,000. And it got bigger and bigger. Now it's $250,000 officially, but really there is no limit, because as these people these idiots have pointed out, if you, with the case of SVP, Silicon Valley Bank, the vast majority of their deposits were uninsured. Well, and of course, it was the Fed's fault for creating these hundreds of billions, trillions of new money, and it all flew into the tech market. And of course, they all deposited it there. Now, what's the bank going to do with all that money there? How can you prudently lend out all that money at the top of a bubble? Well, they bought. So yeah, it's their fault. So, okay, they broke it. Now they got to fix it, but they're fixing it in exactly the way that it broke it to start with. This is a guaranteed disaster.
Yeah, and it does. I mean, my populist tendencies just it really bothers me in that, you know, it is a bailout of venture capital fundamentally, because these are, you know, if it wasn't, some of the venture capitalists themselves had money there, but all of the companies that they funded certainly had all their money there, and all the people who benefited from that crazy largesse over the last decade, it's all that money is there. And the people who are most benefited from that backstopping is definitely the VCs, no doubt about it. And they were making this argument on Twitter, is that, you know, they were saying, well, people are just resentful against tech, so they hate tech, and so that's why people don't want to backstop it. But if this was some bank called Farmers Bank, you know, then everyone would support bailing it out, which is of course utter horseshit, because they didn't when those banks went under.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I wish if they hadn't bailed it out, what would have happened is that bank would have failed and they would have lost all their money. You know, these tech companies, I mean, the whole Silicon Valley bubble would burst, and the bubble would burst lots of other places, because it's a giant daisy chain, because the whole world is totally over financialized at this point. I have an article in today's internationalman.com that explains how is a bank supposed to work. And the way banks today work has absolutely about zero to do with the way banks are supposed to work in a sound society. I mean, the whole world is so over financialized. I mean, 20% of the value of all the stocks in the stock market, and of course this is changing as we speak now, were financial stocks. Well, that's ridiculous. I mean, all they're doing is, all they should be doing is moving money and keeping money safe until people figure out what they want to do with it. It's not the way it works anymore by a long stretch. This is going to be it's going to be worse than a disaster. I think it's going to be a catastrophe. Which is worse, a disaster or a catastrophe? Good question.
I think a catastrophe.
I think a catastrophe is probably worse. Yeah.
You know, one of the things that's a missed opportunity from this bailout of these depositors is that it was an opportunity for lots of really intelligent people to learn the downside of fractional reserve banking for the first time, you know. But now, like, they had learned what was so flawed about our banking system, from the fractional reserve part, but also the fact that people were shocked that you give your deposit money to the bank and the bank goes and does whatever they want with it. I mean, people were surprised by that.
Yeah, and of course, just briefly, the fractional reserve system, since they're all part of a system, if a bank takes in $1,000, it can lend out, I don't know what the reserve is it 90% or 100%? It actually doesn't matter. They can lend that out immediately. And what happens to that money? Well, it's redeposited in another bank. And then they can lend it out. And then they can lend it out. So the fractional reserve system allows the money supply to expand. And that's on top of the fact, the more basic thing in some ways is that there's no longer any differentiation between savings accounts and and checking accounts, because historically and economically, rationally, they're two totally separate businesses that have been merged. We could go into explaining exactly what I mean by that. People should read the article first, and then we can talk about it next if there are any questions. But no, this is. So the only question I have at this point, will it be simply a financial meltdown, where all the real wealth in the world still exists, but a lot of paper wealth goes away, and over-indebted people, which is the big thing, that have borrowed all this money, lose what they have. Okay, that's one thing. Or will it be an economic disaster where people start losing their jobs and businesses close their doors, and there's deferred maintenance on everything? And yeah, I think it's going to turn into that. Yes, I do. And then the next thing is going to be, especially because they're fomenting a war, not just in the Ukraine, but with China over these islands in the South China Sea. It's another subject worth talking about, but not now. And God knows where else. Yeah, it'll be military. And of course, it's demographic too, because these people have actively fomented race hatred everywhere. I mean, it's not necessary, doesn't happen in the normal course of events, but yeah, that's happening too. So this is really going to be interesting to watch. I think Uruguay is one of the most backward, isolated countries in the world, but adequately developed. It's probably one of the best places to be, just to watch this shit happen on the widescreen, which I've said for years.
I feel pretty good about it. I have to say, so far I've been here, 16 months. There hasn't been a day where I go, yeah, I wish I were back in the US, honestly.
Yeah, it's pretty quiet, but we got everything that we need or want here. Well, except fine exotic dining. There's no Vietnamese or Japanese or even good Chinese restaurants here. That's too bad. They're kind of insular that way.
They are.
But
they are.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, if things get bad enough, I don't think people will have those fine dining choices in a lot of the US either. If things get that bad.
No.
Too poor for it.
No, they may not. Well, and if the Uruguayans really want one bad enough, they can start a war with somebody, one of those countries, and then take in lots of immigrants that can start restaurants. But it's not necessary to start a war to get good restaurants.
That's been the U.S. strategy for fine dining: start wars all over the world.
That's right.
It is diverse. It is diverse because of that. Yeah, as we were talking to Jim earlier, he brought up the fact that in the U.S.'s entire existence, there's only been 15 years without war of some kind happening somewhere.
Yeah, it's very much like what happened with the Roman Empire. It was the temple of the two-faced god who was called, sorry, his name has slipped my mind. Nobody knows who he is anymore.
Is that Janus?
Janus, exactly. Yes, the temples, the doors of the temple of Janus, where I guess because war could go either way, turn right, turn left, anything happened. So the temple doors were almost always closed for always, because the Romans were always at war. And it worked out really well for them, it seemed, for a long time. And then it turned out that it was actually a really bad mistake for many reasons we could talk about. So it worked out equally badly for the Athenians too, when they thought that Athens was the center of the world, which it was. And then they decided to teach the Spartans a lesson, and didn't work out quite the way they expected.
Well, and I think the U.S. is set up for that right now with Russia. It seems to me I don't know if you saw the news about there was a drone, U.S. drone that was flying around the Black Sea. Apparently it was an unarmed surveillance drone. And it was, they had some Russian jets went up to check it out, and they dumped their fuel on it first, kind of like a dog peeing on a fire hydrant, kind of an insult, it seemed to me. And then ultimately it crashed. There's differing reports as to why it crashed, but the U.S. response to that has been, how dare they? And almost this desire to immediately escalate. You have Lindsey Graham, on TV demanding some escalation or reprisal. You have Senator Cotton saying we should immediately get some more drones up there with fighter escort. What are these people thinking? Do they want Americans to die in Europe again? Is that what the point of all this?
It's amazing that shameful little poofter, Lindsey Graham. What is the matter with the people of his home state? Is he from South Carolina?
Yes.
Yeah. Why? How do people like that keep getting elected? I guess it's because he brings home the bacon and passes out favors to people, and then they tell everybody he's a good guy and all that. So I guess Bubis Americanus is getting exactly what he deserves. The kind of people get the leaders that they deserve, generally speaking. So I have less and less sympathy for residents of the United States. But as far as these people are insane warmongers. They're just asking for trouble. I mean, Russia is a country that threatens nobody. Well, no, they're going to invade Europe all the way to. This is completely. This is a fantasy that's been made up, and we've gone over in the past the reasons why they invaded Ukraine. A mistake, yes. Were they provoked? Mightily provoked. So how long were they supposed to be provoked, and what could they do about it? Well, it's a real problem. That's something that could have been talked about beforehand, but I'm fairly convinced that the Russians are, and of course, all we know is propaganda from this side and propaganda from the other side, and you can't be sure who to believe. War, the truth is the first casualty in war, but you can't play with fire like this when both sides have nuclear weapons, and certainly on our side, many of them are criminally insane. They're professional warmongers. I think the Russians are much more prudent about this type of thing. Well, maybe not. They invaded Afghanistan, and it wasn't so long after World War II. You'd think they would have known better. I don't know how this can end badly. We can only hope that since Biden blew up the Nord Stream, the Germans are going to, back away from this disaster.
I hope so. And I know I sidetracked us into talking about Russia just because this was something new in the news, but we'll get back to the banking thing in just a second and maybe what people should do about it. But I think that do you think that people like Lindsey Graham are actually just so foolishly arrogant that they do not understand the consequences of their demands, or are they more like these some new age cult that wants to bring on the end times as fast as possible? Because it doesn't make sense to me, their approach.
No, it doesn't. But as I pointed out before, these people that are in Washington in very high and well-known positions and are very well known are actually terminally ignorant. And from my personal experience, which is the best way to talk, because that's something I actually know about, I had lunch, just me, with Newt Gingrich, who was a leading figure in the deep state, the Beltway crowd years ago. And not so long after the 9/11 disaster. So I asked him, so what did you think about Building 7, Newt? What happened there? And you know what his response was? What are you talking about? And I said, well, that was like a 50-story office building that was part of the World Trade Center complex that collapsed in its own footprint about 12 hours after the 1 and 2 were hit. And he looked at me quizzically. He says, is that right? I mean, he didn't know about it. They hadn't told him about it. His staff hadn't told him about it because I guess they thought it was irrelevant. So even these fools that are leaders actually don't know what's going on because they live in their own little political bubble. I mean, it's shocking and shameful. It would be wonderful to interrogate Lindsey Graham. Well, I shouldn't use that word because you might think, no, not the way the CIA does it in their black sites. I wouldn't want to scare them away. But anything can happen with these people.
Yeah, well, the ignorance thing, I think that's crazy. It's crazy they're that dumb, but it does make sense. It's the only thing that kind of justifies some of their decisions and thinking is that they just are totally clueless and totally inept. So it makes sense. So Doug, what do you think?
They keep provoking the Russians. I'll give you my prediction. As far as I can tell, I mean, it could wind up with World War III and, many European and other cities turn into smoking ruins. I mean, that's possible. But I think what's most likely to happen is the Russians will capture about a third or half of the Ukraine, which is full of Russian-speaking people that want to be part of Russia, or at least not part of the Ukraine for lots of reasons. And it'll end there. That's the way I predict it's going to happen.
Hope you're right. Hope you're right.
Yeah, that's the best case scenario.
Okay. So back to the banking stuff, Doug. Sorry for that sidelining things, but what should someone do right now if they have a lot of cash in a bank? Because, you know, businesses, obviously any business operating is going to have more, it's going to have more over the insured amount. You know, if this is a financial crisis that's spreading, like, are there things an individual or a business could do or should do in order to try and protect themselves?
Yes, because apparently Silicon Valley Bank was what they call systemically important. So they could bail out everybody that had it. But what if you're not in a systemically important bank? You know, they've got to show a little bit of background by punishing the plebs. So if you're in flyover country, yeah, I think you should probably open up as many different accounts as you reasonably can and deposit it there, or buy treasury bills.
What you can do through Treasury Direct, I think, right?
Because
Treasury
the US
Direct.
government, yeah, exactly, something like that. But you shouldn't keep, if you're in flyover country, more than $250,000, because they may not bail you out. And you'll certainly be inconvenienced while they try to figure out what to do.
Right.
And so that's one thing. And this is, of course, the reason why the stock market may be better than cash, maybe, because at least these corporations, some of them anyway, own real assets. So, okay, that's an argument for not being a super double bear on the stock market, although it's grossly overpriced. If you have any bonds, and bonds have bounced up recently, flight to safety, ridiculous concept, because these bonds are all zombies. They really all are. Remember, bonds are a triple threat to your capital. You've got the interest rate risk, and interest rates are headed up. No question about that in my mind, over the long term. I'm not saying if you're a future speculator, go short tomorrow morning. No. So you got the interest rate risk, you've got the currency risk, and the dollar is going to reach its intrinsic value, and you've got the credit risk. A lot of these companies are going to default on their bonds, and you don't know, even if it looks pretty good, they may have interest that somebody defaults on them and changes everything, and it's a daisy chain. So, okay, forget bonds. You should be buying gold. And I've said for years, gold is reasonably priced, not cheap, not dear. I mean, it's done really well since 1971, having gone up about 55 times, which is why I think you should use it as a savings vehicle for safety, for prudence. But wait a minute, this is exactly the time when you want safety and prudence, and it's not overpriced, but it's going higher. It could turn into a good speculation. So now it brings us to the next thing. Well, what about, well, we can talk about all these other commodities. Let's not do that. It's gold mining stocks and oil stocks. Okay. I think oil is very reasonably priced at this point. You know, in that book I wrote in 1993, Crisis Investing for the Rest of the 90s, terrible title, but publishers title books, not authors, especially that publisher, which is subsequently out of business. There are morons. Anyway, I had a very good chapter on oil. If you have a copy of the book, dig it up. And at the time I said, look, oil's $25. And I gave all the reasons, blah, 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 production, consumption, the whole thing. Why it was kind of reasonably priced at $25. Well, in the 30 years since then, yeah, $70, which is where oil is now, is reasonably priced. So oil's fine. Natural gas is cheap. There are natural gas stocks out there. There are lots of oil stocks, which incidentally sold off, and gas stocks too, where you can get 10%. I think they're a great place to be right now.
That's amazing. Amazing.
Yeah, big upside potential and get paid while you wait. But gold stocks, oddly enough, the big ones, well, Newmont's the biggest one, have been moving up. But the kind of small speculative crap that I tend to own, yeah, they've been going up, but with gold up like 20 and 30 and $50 in a day recently, no real action. Public is too scared. Public doesn't know these stocks exist. They're too scared, and if they knew they exist, they'd be too afraid of them. So I think it's a good place to be, because at some point, the mania is going to spill over into these crappy little gold stocks, and they will fly. Because, like I said, they're not small caps. They're not mini caps. They're not micro caps. They're nano caps. Some of them are pico caps. They don't even exist to legitimate investors. People that, anyway, I think it's a good bet, but I could be dead wrong.
Wow,
but I
it's possible.
If I'm dead wrong on that, I'll mostly just be embarrassed, I think.
So, as a practical matter, your any money that you have that's in a brokerage account falls under a different legal jurisdiction than it does if it's in a bank account, right? So is it like, if you had extra cash in a bank account, would you be better off just moving it to your brokerage instead in general?
The SIPC, how much does SIPC insure too? I think SIPC insures, it's the sticker principle. Again, you put a sticker on the door, government guaranteed, don't worry about anything. I think, am I correct? Is it $1 million for SIPC?
I don't know. I'll look it up though. I'll find out.
I should look it up. That's much more relevant for someone. And of course, in Canada, it's a different story again. And I'm not exactly sure, embarrassingly, what the situation is in Canada, or for that matter, in most countries in the world, because these rules are always changing and the amounts are always changing. So
it appears that it provides a limit of up to $500,000 in cash and $250,000 in securities per account.
In SIPC or in Canada?
In SIPC.
SIPC.
That's what Google's telling me. I assume that's correct.
500,000 in cash and 250 in securities. Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
So I guess it's somewhat better than the.
I wonder if but I'd like to, well, let's see, if the brokerage firm fails, maybe your cash will be wiped out. But if you're carrying a debit balance, I'll bet that's not going to be wiped out.
And the accountants will find a way to make sure that is not forgotten.
That's right. Poor little guy. He always gets screwed.
Always gets screwed. I even saw some people, just like we remember the meme stock thing, how, all these people who are, when there was a short squeeze on GameStop, remember a year and a half ago, whatever it was. And basically all those trades got unwound, just because the little guy was on that side of the trades, and like how the LME squeeze around nickel, got completely unwound, where the people who were betting properly, it didn't work out. Apparently. Yeah.
And there was nothing, and that's nothing new, because back in the, it was about 1980, I guess, the Hunt brothers, the famous Hunt brothers, were notoriously long silver, trying to corner the market. And of course, the exchanges stepped in and helped, they all got together to crash the market, and the poor Hunts lost all their money. So
it's a rigged game. It is a rigged game.
So the best thing to do is just kind of, play around the edges. So, but don't, well, I'm not talking to Jamie Dimon here. And I try to read his missives, but they're just, I don't know. I don't know what to think of them. Do you have any opinion on Jamie Dimon's missives, which he sends out to everybody?
I mean, he always sounds thoughtful and intelligent and a little bit magnanimous, honestly. But everything he says is for broad public consumption, to make sure that people don't come with pitchforks to the bank, I think. So
probably. I mean, maybe he's a real smart guy. He's not as smart as Jim Rogers. I'm sure he's pretty smart.
Yeah, I'm sure he is pretty smart. But there was apparently there was another one of these trades got unwound. People who had were shorting Silicon Valley Bank through options, because the stock was technically halted and those options are expiring, some exchanges are not allowing people to unwind those, seriously profitable. Yeah.
So if you guess right, you're screwed. Is
Yeah.
that what you're saying? Oh, that's interesting. I never thought about that.
It's amazing, isn't it? I mean, these.
Well, of course, one of the problems with the market, both stocks and commodities, is that people don't really trade stocks and commodities. They trade options on stocks and commodities. So these derivatives are, especially derivatives on commodities, and I do this all the time, so I recognize the risk, but I don't think most people recognize it. These are derivatives. They're not the real things. I mean, they can dry up and blow away.
Exactly. In a properly functioning market, outside of the extremes, it always works. But when something gets extreme at all, there's always some issue. And then usually that gets unwound to the disadvantage of the individual investor.
Yeah. Yeah. It's one thing if options trading was, a fringe activity, no big deal. Okay, that's fine. But now everybody does it. It's the way everything is done, including institutions. So it's, one more reason why things could go seriously wrong. Yeah. But is that right? They're not acknowledging the put purchases on SVP, huh?
Yeah, at least, well, I know for sure Robinhood isn't, and I thought I saw that Fidelity was trying to reject them as well. But yes, yeah, that's what they're trying to. Yeah, they're rejecting it.
Gee, I thought Robinhood and Fidelity were on the front of the friends of the little guy. I mean, Robinhood.
Well, I'm sure the SEC will step in and bail those individuals out. I mean, that's why they're there, right?
Yeah, of course. That's what the SEC is. Therefore, they've got thousands of employees, and to the costs of just maintaining the bureaucracy, all the supernumeraries and cubicle fillers, and well, of course, the hotshots don't fill cubicles. They've got sumptuous offices. Of the SEC, I don't know what their current expenditures just on that is I think about $5 billion. I stand to be corrected on that. But that's chicken feed relative to the damage that they do directly by creating distortions in the market and indirectly by making Bubasek Americanus think that he's protected by somebody. So certainly one of the things that I would do is abolish the SEC. Well, but there are many agents, in fact, all had abolished, and it's completely academic. So I'm happy to make this statement just to put the meme out there, which everybody will think is completely insane. Well, and of course, at this point, if you did that, the whole system would collapse, which it'll collapse anyway. But I'd rather have a controlled demolition than have it all collapse totally unexpectedly on the part of the poor people in flyover country, which is what's going to happen, incidentally.
Mm-hmm. No doubt about it. All right. Well, on that good news, I think we'll leave it there for today, Doug. And next time we talk, I sent you this video about this Stanford speech from this federal judge. I'd like to take a look at that and we could talk about that, because I think we've already started to see the beginnings of a cultural revolution, like a total Maoist style cultural revolution in America. And I think everyone is underestimating it, but I want you to watch that video and let's discuss.
I think you're right. Good point. All right. We'll do that soon. And of course, Friday, regardless, we'll have questions and answers. So file members can send in questions and we'll talk about the questions and your questions, my answers. I hope my answers are some good. Yours too.
All right. Okay. Thanks, Doug. Really appreciate it. Talk to you then.
Thanks, man.